So before we actually start thinking about the topic for today's webinar, I just wanted to explain a little bit about the project work that we're doing at the moment at the British Nutrition Foundation, of which this webinar is part of it. And it's all around the future of food education. And what we're doing is we're working with the support of the All Saints Educational Trust, and we're looking into what makes a future modern food education and what it should look like and contain. And the project has got 4 elements to it. So we're doing, or have done, I should say, a teacher and pupil survey. And we've got the results, the interim results on the website already, and we'll be putting the updated results on the website shortly. We had a half-day consensus building event, which was very successful at the beginning of October, and the recordings and presentations are also on the website. We're going to be developing some new recipes that are more inclusive and diverse, and it'll be really interesting if you could perhaps let us know, and I'd find it very helpful, if you could let us know what sort of recipes that you think would be good for us to work on and develop. We're going to be developing sort of around 24 recipes. So if you've got any ideas, please let us know, perhaps put something in the chat box or write in to us, email in. And we're also going to be doing some teacher training, which is going to be based on the recipes that we're going to be putting together and also the other work that we've been doing around this. So in a moment, we're going to be actually playing a presentation recording that we've done from Georgine. Now, Georgine's actually based in Hong Kong, and she's very kindly agreed to stay up and be with us this evening and actually answer some questions at the end. But we thought the safest thing to do would be to record her presentation. So it's around about 30 minutes. But I've watched it through and it's really interesting, and I think you'll find it very worthwhile. And do stay on till the end and ask Georgine any questions that you might have, or Ewan. So I'm going to stop sharing my presentation now, and I'm going to ask Ewan to share the video, and then we'll be back in about 30 minutes time.
Hello and good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining me today on this webinar, and a very happy birthday to Food, a Fact of Life for turning 30 this year. I'm really pleased to be part of the celebrations and also contributing to our conversations around the future of food education. My name is Georgine and I'm a nutritionist, and I work across different food projects. I have a particular interest in learning and understanding how society and culture shape the way we eat. I am also a student researcher at the Institute for Global Health at University College London, where I study the postpartum food practices of mothers, their families, and their caregivers in Chinese society. So today we're going to study a little bit more on the cultural awareness in delivering healthy eating messages in the food classroom. So as an overview, we're going to cover what it means in terms of ethnicity and health. We're going to have a look at what traditional diets are, what does it mean when it comes to world foods, and how do they actually fit into our everyday food culture. We're going to zoom in to study the Eat Well Guide and to examine how we could use it as a tool to teach about diet diversity and incorporating our conversations about different food cultures in the UK. And we're also going to have a look at engaging with different pupils from a variety of backgrounds to develop the inclusive food classroom. So first and foremost, ethnicity and health is a very wide topic. We know that ethnicity is a complex concept. It's multi-dimensional, and this is very important when it comes to capturing any health data relating to people's ethnic backgrounds. We should bear in mind always that ethnicity is a self-reported identity. And of course, we know that health is shaped by many different factors, many drivers, from family history to socioeconomic status, to level of education, to influences from the media, society, and culture, so on. And this is why we have to be cognizant of all the factors in play. One particular health outcome when it comes to any health disparities across ethnic groups is measurement of overweight and obesity. We know that for groups such as the South Asians, the amount of body fat is actually higher at a lower BMI. And this is why it is important to call for appropriate cutoffs for particular groups in our population. And of course, it's very important as well to develop any culturally appropriate health interventions when it comes to engaging with the leaders of community, as well as any religious groups too. And of course, we know that the cutoffs are important markers when it comes to managing the risk of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes too. When it comes to capturing food intakes across minority ethnic groups, the picture is a bit more complicated because we know that the eating behavior is much more multifaceted. There's a large birth cohort study, one of the world's largest actually, called Born in Bradford. It follows 13,500 children and their families on their health behaviors, and the researchers actually study a wide variety of health outcomes as well. And one of the key findings they found is Pakistani families, actually compared to white British counterparts, consume a higher amount of sugar sweetened beverages. And the reasons are very complex, and this is mainly due to a sign of hospitality. And of course, when it comes to sugar sweetened beverages, we know how widely available they are at such a low cost. And this is why, apart from the hospitality aspects, the easy availability of sugar sweetened beverages has also driven personal consumption too. And this is why understanding the drivers of food choice is very important when delivering health interventions and tackling the differences in health behaviors across minority ethnic groups. And of course, we know that terminology is very important. The mannerism in which we go about, we're talking about the health behaviors of different people. We should do it with a lot of sensitivity to avoid the risk of stigmatization. And when it comes to culturally appropriate health interventions, the setting is always key. We know that some people, for them, community and social eating is very, very important. And this is why we need to be cognizant of the setting involved. And other health interventions also include physical recommendations when it comes to understanding and improving physical activity levels. There is also an understanding where we know there are inequalities involved across different minority ethnic groups compared to white British families. In particular, children from minority ethnic backgrounds show a lower average level of physical activity compared to white British children. And of course, we know that again, the drivers to this difference is multifaceted, but there is also an issue of representation when it comes to sports such as swimming, basketball, tennis, cricket, horse riding, etc. And of course, there's also a gender divide. And these factors need to be taken into account when designing interventions to improve physical activity, as well as other factors such as access to facilities, the participation in physical activity, specifically in group activities, learning about the health benefits, as well as just appreciating the enjoyment as well. These are all important factors which should be accounted for. So having an overview of ethnicity and health, let's now move to the idea of ethnic foods. I'm sure this concept is not new to anyone. We go to a standard supermarket and increasingly we see aisles which are labeled as world foods or ethnic foods. the idea of world foods have been constantly been reshaped through historical trade routes, through the movement of people, migration, and increasingly in recent decades through international travels. And of course, in the last 10, 20 years or so, we know social media has also played a very important part too. So the way we consume world cuisine and world foods is rather instantaneous these days, and definitely more accessible than just a couple of generations before us. And this is why it's not surprising indeed that world foods is one of the fastest growing sectors in the UK retail industry. And in fact, it grew the quickest during the year of 2020. We know the pandemic happened. There was a lot more time spent at home, and it really piqued the curiosity for people who are adventurous to try different things, especially in the kitchen when it comes to world foods and world flavors. According to Mintel, which is one of the UK's largest market intelligence agency, they actually published a report focusing on world cuisines back in May this year. They examined the way we consume world cuisines and world foods, and they actually found that the UK consumer is becoming more adventurous. They are willing to try different things which accompany the experience. They are willing to try different accompaniments, different seasonings and spices, condiments and dips and cooking sauces, etc. So it shows that there's scope to develop this further because we are getting more confident perhaps in the kitchen. And in fact, for over 60% of world cuisine buyers and eaters, they would actually like to try a new skill involved. And I think this is particularly encouraging for us who work in food education, that there's scope and room to, first of all, develop and educate, and also to support the enjoyment of world cuisines in the kitchen created by themselves as well. And when it comes to attitude on enjoying world cuisines, they are actually, it's all very positive. I think the top attitude is, I enjoy trying world cuisine, which is very encouraging indeed. And coming up next is actually people are willing to go for the healthier option as well. Perhaps the pandemic has triggered people's change in health behaviors, but it's really exhilarating for a nutritionist like myself that a healthy option is no longer considered as a boring option, but something rather attractive. And indeed, the skill development involved is really exciting too. And this is why when looking at the future of food education, there's really a strong point for us to incorporate world cuisine as part of the pillars in our food classroom. So one way of assessing world cuisines is to learn about traditional foods and traditional diets and how food plays in people's food culture. Of course, there are so many different types of foods, and one nice way of going about with it is to pop down to either the world foods aisle in your supermarket, or if you've got some shops nearby, some of the shops which sell world foods, such as some ethnic shops which sell perhaps South Asian food or Chinese food, Korean food, or a range of African Caribbean cuisines, they all offer very interesting ingredients which might not be available in the UK supermarket. And that might be an interesting experience for you and your students to enjoy. And I've got some examples here to show you. There are these turmeric root over here on the top basket, and the root ginger on the bottom basket, and the bottom basket right there, which are important to a range of Asian cuisines, particularly for South Asian cuisines. And on the picture on the right here, you can see that there are these longevity buns, which are important to Chinese culinary culture as a birthday celebratory food. And of course, I think when it comes to traditional foods, there's a way of understanding it as if it never really changes. But this is an example that foods, the way we eat and how we associate different foods for different occasions actually does change throughout the course of time. So the longevity buns are no longer as relevant as before, and birthday cakes, I think across the world, are seen to be standard birthday foods these days. So noting generational change throughout time is also very important when we study traditional diets and traditional foods. So here we are, the Eat Well Guide, which shows the proportions of foods which depict a healthy, varied and sustainable diet. I'm sure we're all very familiar with seeing the Eat Well Guide in the food classroom, teaching about it. The Eat Well Guide is a great basis as a tool to talk about diet diversity as well. So of course, we see a depiction of the different types of foods on the Eat Well Guide. But when it comes to teaching diet diversity, the Eat Well Guide can be adapted to suit the needs of your students. And a great activity perhaps is to get your students involved and create their own template. This could be done either on their own. You can provide them with a template for them to fill up using magazine cutouts of foods or foods that they can take pictures of and posters, paste it on the Eat Well Guide, or they can also do it collectively as a class. So obviously, this can be adapted across different key stages. For the younger ones, they might want to bring in some foods and they can do a bit of a show and tell how then these foods fit into the Eat Well Guide. And for the older ones, they might want to write a couple of sentences. And of course, that will connect with the other aspects of the curriculum when it comes to literacy, importantly as well. So many different ways, and I think these are all very interesting ways to reflect and reflect what is important when it comes to foods for the students, and also to think about diet diversity when it comes to engaging with students of different cultural backgrounds. So when you want to focus on different food groups right away, if we start with the foods which are rich in starchy carbohydrates, when it comes to bread, it's not just bread. So there are different types of breads, from chapatis, roti, dosas, and other wheat products such as noodles, rice, and it's not just your plain easy cook rice. We've got basmati rice, got jasmine rice. And when it comes to tubers like potatoes, there's sweet potatoes, cassava, yams, all making useful contribution to sources of starchy carbohydrates too. And of course, there are other types like even cornmeal, polenta. These are also very important aspects when it comes to thinking about foods rich in starchy carbohydrates. And next, when it comes to foods such as fruit and vegetables, naturally, these are foods already wide in variety. You've got fruits and got vegetables, very exciting, lots of different colors. And it's also interesting, when you look at the different types, although here we already see, about probably 20 odd types here. Zooming into, say, just green leafy vegetables, it's not just broccoli alone or your plain lettuce. You've got seasonal greens, spring greens, kale, and other interesting types like pak choy, choy sum, all very different in colors and flavors, etc. And when it comes to mushrooms, I think mushrooms have been increasingly been used widely across different dishes. And indeed, in certain cuisines, like in Asian cuisine, there are not just one type of mushrooms, but so many different kinds of mushrooms looking slightly different as well. Some long, some a bit small looking, stout looking, some bigger, wider, all very interesting and offering unique flavor, texture profile. And they are great when it comes to cooking vegetable dishes and just mixing the colors up a little bit. And of course, you've got the root vegetables, the squashes, all the different kinds, the spring onions, the shallots, and all very delicious and flavorful as well. So the key message is to try different kinds, go for a variety. And then if you're curious to try more, I think nowadays in UK mainstream supermarkets, increasingly that you find a lot more when it comes to the different types and varieties available. But also try your corner shop or some of these smaller shops which offer specific world foods, and you might be surprised what you see there as well. And when it comes to the protein containing food group, the key message, of course, is sustainability, increasingly important and relevant topic nowadays. Very, very controversial, I think, sometimes when it comes to students holding different opinion, but is all useful when it comes to contributing to that conversation when it comes to sustainability. And of course, when it comes to it, it's important to choose foods which are grown sustainably. You can tell it from the labeling generally for prepackaged foods. And I think another important message when it comes to sustainability is go for a variety. And it's very important when it comes to choosing different sorts of protein providing foods. And of course, when it comes to animal source products, we see, fish, some poultry meats, some red meats here. And the key message is try to keep the red meat consumption down, because as a population, the average consumption is too much. And I think there are other cuts of meats which are not shown here, which can make useful contributions to as well. For example, some offal which people might eat, maybe just occasionally, but they can also be useful. And then when it comes to vegetarian sources of protein foods, we have the beans and pulses, nuts and seeds, all very important sources of protein when it comes to a vegetarian or vegan diet. And I think increasingly it might be more relevant to older students these days, particularly for girls, because they are making these changes to their diets of different factors. And I think it's very important then another conversation around this food group is then to how to eat a vegetarian or vegan diet healthily. So of course, teaching them choosing different kinds of beans and products, beans, pulses, and then of course you've got other products such as tofu and tempeh, which already are traditionally widely consumed products made from soya in Asia. But you can also see quite a lot of plant-based alternatives to meat made from soya protein these days. So then again, the conversation or debate perhaps would be how we can make useful contributions to climate change efforts, sustainability efforts when it comes to consuming foods from this food group, but making sure that our diet is varied nutritionally as well. When it comes to dairy and alternatives, of course, dairy as a food group, not everyone is tolerant to the milk, sugar, lactose, and this is why alternatives are provided. Some people might choose not to have dairy for other reasons as well. And I think it is very interesting to consider this group, particularly when it comes to diet diversity, because it's shown that lactose intolerance happens quite often for people with a background from Asia or across the African continent. And so if most people are around the world intolerant to lactose, perhaps we might need to think differently about the terminology when it comes to lactose intolerance. Is that even an appropriate term these days, or should we switch it around to think about how we call this condition? So these are all related to culture in a way, and I think quite good talking points when it comes to having a conversation, connecting culture, your diet, and some topical issues in food and nutrition when it comes to eating healthily and making the connections with geography, climate, and our humanity as well. So an example when it comes to using ingredients in the kitchen, these are my personal examples. So you might use it very differently. And it's just a way of thinking about how to get children perhaps started about the conversation, using a wide variety of foods. You can use food images, or you can use a food prop as well if you're able to find some of these foods. So have a go. I'll give you a couple of seconds here. All right, so the first one is the red papaya, which is grown in the subtropics, and mainly in warmer weather. There's actually quite a wide variety of papayas available, and this large papaya is actually about that big. It's got a really subtle sweetness to it, and it's quite delicious. In the middle, we have these king oyster mushrooms, which have been halved. They are massive, they are really king size. And then on the right-hand side, very interesting texture, they are the bitter gourd. And the bitterness, it actually tastes bitter. And the bitterness actually comes through the seeds. So before cooking, we've got to scrape the seeds off. Bitter gourd is particularly important in a range of Asian cuisines, from South Asian cuisine being used in curries to Eastern Asian cuisines to be used in stir fries. So here are the examples that I've used in cooking these ingredients. So papaya, recently I've bought a massive papaya, and I've used it to make a fish broth, actually, using fish, papaya, and tofu. And this is a broth that I've grown up with. It's particularly Cantonese broth, and it's very interesting because I think bringing this conversation online, some other cultures, I think in the African continent, also use papaya to make soup when it comes to delivering certain properties, particularly for women's health. In the middle, I used the king oyster mushroom to make a quick kind of stewy, stir-fry dish with shiitake mushrooms, radish mouli, and some dried bean curd puffs. And on the right, I used the bitter gourd to pan fry it with egg. And this is also a dish that I grew up with and ate quite a bit when I was young. So here are some examples. Your students might be familiar or not familiar with these foods, and it'll be quite interesting to see their response and gauge their reaction on what they think about these foods and these dishes perhaps. And you can completely adopt this to your own liking and to your own experience with food too. Another way of gauging our conversation with diet diversity is to have a look at different cooking techniques. I love using the example of fish because it's usually quite divisive when it comes to what is considered acceptable as a fish being presented on the table. Of course, we can cook whole fish, from grilling the fish in the middle, as you can see, and we've got steamed fish as well on the right. But perhaps most families would be most familiar with fish being battered in or breaded in fish fingers and fish fillets. That's completely fine too, but it's interesting to gauge the response and how students actually are receptive, the level of reception when it comes to the different styles of cooking when it comes to fish. And a great conversation starter is to begin your journey with fish at the fishmonger. I'm always surprised the variety of fish which is offered at a fishmonger compared to the prepackaged ones at a supermarket. Even at the same fishmonger, at the same supermarket, you already find quite a bit of difference when it comes to the variety and options available. And of course, not everyone likes it because the smell is quite strong, but to enjoy the whole, I would say, fish or animals is very useful and important for us to know where it comes from, and seeing it whole is a great way of learning about it as well. And another way of learning about traditional foods is through festivities. On the left-hand side, we see all these lovely red lanterns during Lunar New Year. And Chinatown is a great place to be when it comes to this time of the year. There are lots of food activities going on, from going to a restaurant to just checking out some of the shops along the streets of Chinatown as well. So it might be a nice time to go and also to enjoy the festivities. In the middle is a picture of iftar during the month of Ramadan, and it's important for us to have a conversation about the importance of foods in religion and religious celebrations as well. And there might be students who celebrate Ramadan, and it's great for them to then talk about the foods they might have during this month. Even during fasting, they still eat and they celebrate it at the meal of iftar. And it's really important that we include the conversation and think about some of these foods offered. And it's a great way to learn about food and religion. And then on the right here, we've got some mithai sweets, which are celebrated during the during the time of Diwali, which is a very colorful and beautiful time, and is a time where we celebrate. It's called the Festival of Lights as well. So it's a very joyful time for particularly the Hindi community. And then at the bottom here, we have a recent celebration of Hanukkah, which is celebrated by the Jewish community, and also a festival of lights. And there are foods involved too, which have particular symbolic meanings. And when it comes to symbolic meanings, it's very important that we understand the true meanings. And sometimes there might be certain areas when it's lost in translation, but then the importance about these foods is paramount when it comes to festive foods. So bear in mind festive foods being a great vehicle to learn about food culture too. So when it comes to learning about foods, apart from some of the very practical elements, I think another way of thinking about it is to use our senses. There's a great charity called Taste Education UK, in short Taste Ed, which does brilliant work when it comes to connecting our food experience using our senses and building our food literacy. So of course, we know our key senses are seeing, smelling, hearing, touching the food. So students are encouraged to try to use their different senses and to describe their experience when it comes to seeing the food, smelling the food, listening to the food, how does it actually sound, and touching the food. And lastly, they would be encouraged to taste the food, but no one is pressurized to do so. However, the evidence has shown that for children who seem to begin Taste Ed sessions being reluctant to try the food, they usually at the end of even one session, they are happy to try the food at least once. So it's really great when it comes to trying foods and building their food literacy. And when it comes to learning about cultural diversity, they have a great lesson plan about refugees. And the key topic really is to focus on their stories and learn through food using the sense smell. And we know how the sense smell is closely related to a lot of our food memories. And this is a great way of getting children and students to share the personal stories when it comes to food memories using smell. For example, the herb mint. Students during TAZET sessions, they have cited that those with Moroccan and Turkish backgrounds, they are more likely to recall mint as mint tea that they enjoy as part of the family, compared to white British students. They would be more likely to connect the mint flavor with either toothpaste or the mint sauce, which accompanies their roast dinner. So these are all two different, very, very different experiences, but important stories to suggest how we experience the food as part of sharing these experiences through food as well. When it comes to another example, using the spice cardamom, two 11-year-olds actually talk about their stories of cardamom. One of them cited how the spice reminded his time in Pakistan, how he remembered spending time as a family and sharing the food together as well. And you've got another 11-year-old student who talks about cardamom as a reminder of his granny's cooking too. So these are all very powerful and unique food stories, which have been identified as very affirming when it comes to cultural sharing. So do check out their website for the tools that you need to deliver the sensory education in your classroom. Another program I like to share with you is the Fun Healthier Chinese Cuisine Ambassador Program. It's a free teacher training cookery program which offers to schools, which is offered to schools across the UK. The training team comes to the schools, or they set up a regional hub, and they provide free condiments and sauces, cooking sauces for you to use in the kitchen. You can see there are a couple of pictures here I'd like to share with you. Our consultant chef sharing sharing how to use the wok, which is a unique piece of culinary tool, of course, how to use it safely and efficiently in the kitchen. A very short time is usually needed only. And the great thing about cooking with a wok is then you retain the crunchiness and the freshness of the ingredients to enable you to actually enjoy it, the flavors fully. And then you've got another image of some, I think, year 7 students here sitting around and observing a cooking demonstration being done. And this, I think, is Kung Pao chicken, using a variety of vegetables and chicken. So the condiments used are mainly different kinds of soy sauce, oyster sauce, sesame oil, and some of these blended sauces with different flavors as well. And further to Chinese cuisine, you can actually use these condiments to experiment different types of foods as well, and different dishes. And the idea is to be able to use these condiments widely and liberally in the food kitchen there. And once a year, participating teachers get invited to join an annual competition. And the top 3 winners get a free trip to visit Hong Kong on a cultural food exchange. And this is actually Mr. Matthew Walker from the John Warner Academy in John Warner School in Hertfordshire, who is demonstrating how to make beef Cornish pasties using oyster sauce to a group of local secondary school students and their teachers. And I think it's a great exercise. I was actually there. It's great to speak to the food teachers and welcome them to a food classroom, which you might find quite familiar setting, yet very different to their own food classroom back home. And it's a great exercise, and hopefully you'll check out the website and be part of the competition and win a free trip when things open up soon. We'll see you in Hong Kong. Thank you very much. These are references and any further reading that you'd like to have a look at for yourself. And if you've got any questions, we can talk about them in the Q&A session. And I'll now pass the time back to Frances. Thank you. And if you'd like to connect with me, these are my contact details as well.
Thanks, Georgine. That was so interesting. We'll come to you in a minute if that's all right with some questions, but I've certainly been writing some down, and I think there've been some in the chat box as well. So that was fantastic. Thank you very much. But before we get to the questions, I just wanted to go through some of the resources that we've got on the website that you might find useful around sort of general healthy eating, but then also about sort of cultural diversity as well. So as I'm sure you know, we've got, I think it's probably about 3,000 resources on the website now, but a lot of them around healthy eating. So we've got resources in each of the age phases, and they can be activity packs, presentations, videos, etc. We've also got some interactive activities as well. So on the screen, there's a fibre lineup, interactive fibre lineup. There's also an Eat Well guide, which has got hotspots on it. And you can just click on the hotspot and it will give you some more information. And there's an interactive Eat Well guide as well, which is quite a fun activity to do with pupils. We've also got knowledge organisers around healthy eating. We've got food from around the world cards and presentation, and then lots and lots of recipes, all tried and tested. And as I said earlier, new recipes to come. And it would be great if you could give us any ideas of any recipes that you think would be useful for us to look at, or cuisines. That would be really helpful. And then also just some other sort of more general resources that you might find helpful. So Georgine's talked a little bit about sustainability, and we've got some resources now on Food a Fact of Life around healthy, sustainable diets. And there will be more coming over the next few months, because we know that this is an important aspect for pupils and teachers. And we've got some webinar recordings that you might find useful to listen to. So we've got one around vegetables particularly, and supporting pupils in the early years. And there's a presentation and a video recording from that. We've got a couple of recordings of presentations around the Eat Well guide, and also some around portion control and being portion wise. And we've also got some new resources available on the nutrition.org.uk website around that. Georgine talked about some sources of further reading and information, and we'll share Georgine's PowerPoint so you'll be able to get the links to those. But I've just added a few here as well. So I don't know if you've seen it yet, but we have a brand new website for the British Nutrition Foundation. Do have a look if you haven't done so yet, because it's fantastic. The amount of information that's available on there, I think you'll find it really useful. And there was one thing I particularly picked out, which I thought would be good to share today, which are some new resources which we've got around nutrition and immunity. And there are some different posters. One of them's on the screen there for the different age groups that you might be working with. And this one particularly is for teens and adults. And there is one for younger children and for older people. There is some more information on nutrition.org.uk around healthy, sustainable diets. And then, of course, there's always the NHS Live Well, Eat Well website, which you might want to have a look at for some further support and information. And then also, just before we get on to doing the Q&A, I just wanted to quickly just go through some more training that we've got coming up. So we've got some webinars, one next Wednesday around practical food skills, cooking and reducing food waste. We're hopefully going to have a masterclass in January, which is going to be around food styling. And then also during National Careers Week in March, we've got a webinar around careers in food and drink. And then we've also got some practical workshops. Now, these are virtual practical workshops, but we've got one this Saturday. It's very short notice, but we do actually have a couple of spaces available for that. It's designed for trainee, new or non-specialist food teachers around the UK. So if you fall into one of those categories, do have a look on the website and join us if you can. And then we've got some other workshops which are taking place in January and February, which look at food science and food skills, and actually thinking about the practical applications of that in the classroom. And then we've got online courses available too. So before we finish off, let's have a look to see if we've got any questions, and then I'm going to put my camera on as well. So I know some people have been writing some questions in the chat box as we've gone along. There was one that particularly was about the different vegetables, Georgine, that you were talking about when you were looking at the Eat Well guide. And there was a question about whether these might be grown in the UK, because is there an issue perhaps to consider about food miles?
Yes, indeed. I think there are increasingly more homegrown produce now in the UK, or in the vicinity perhaps. But then a good way is to check the labels, of course, just to check. And I think in the UK, they've really done a great job when it comes to labeling where the food is from. So do check it out. Of course, there will be foods which are imported, and this is going to be, you know, an ongoing juggle when it comes to purchasing decisions. Yeah, but it's always the matter of making those decisions and trying out new flavors as well. And of course, supporting local economies, and also some of the businesses, small businesses also rely on the businesses with which sell some of these foods which are imported as well. So it's really a difficult one. But then I think bottom line is just to have a fine balance when it comes to shopping decisions.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And actually following on from that a little bit is about thinking about recipes, because that's one of the things that we've been doing at the moment, and looking at the ingredients that are suggested in recipes, and just being aware that a recipe may ask for a particular ingredient, but that's not necessarily available where you live. So have you got any sort of recommendations or suggestions for people that they can do in order to substitute ingredients?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think substituting ingredients is so important when it comes to the practical aspects in the kitchen, and I'm sure all of you know. And this is why I think when it comes to any absolute suggestion in the recipe, you can always, you know, go for an alternative. Like for tubers, for example, potatoes, you always go for another kind, like sweet potato. Particularly vegetables, you can, I think most vegetables are quite interchangeable, if you like, the green veggies and some of the more gourd-based type as well. So when it comes to thinking about alternatives, it's always about the texture, the flavor, the amount of moisture when it comes to it as well. I'm sure, you know, with more experience and more practice, you'll also be able to fiddle the recipes accordingly with whatever's available in your kitchen too.
Great, thank you. And just thinking about the Eat Well guide and the fact that that's our sort of UK healthy eating model, and there are lots of different models around the rest of the world. And as you're based in Hong Kong now, I was just wondering, is it the Eat Well guide in Hong Kong, or is it something else?
No, so they use a pyramid here, and I think, of course, we used to use. I think it's based in the US, the pyramid idea, but then everything's been changed now. So the pyramid is used, it's kind of a pyramid, but I think in China they use a pagoda shape. So it's always quite interesting to compare the different Eat Well guides around the world. And then of course, I think when it comes to, I think the Eat Well guide in the UK it's actually very relevant, because there's so many different messages and very up-to-date messages as well. On the Eat Well guide with sustainability, and I think a very close one might be the one from Italy, the Barilla Foundation. They have an excellent guide as well. So when you want to compare the different Eat Well suggestions around the world, one thing is to go on to the FAO website, and you can download the different guides to compare and contrast, and it will be interesting to also see and observe some of the different approaches when it comes to the dietary culture there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's actually one of the activities that we've got on Food Effective Life, is looking at the different models around the world, because I think it's quite useful for pupils to see where our UK model came from and how it compares to other models that they might see, particularly if they're doing research online. They might see other models, and it's a good idea for them to actually compare them, as you say. So that's great, thank you. One of the things that I liked actually from your presentation as well was the Mintel research that you had, and thinking about how people's attitudes to different foods perhaps have changed, maybe even more so over the last couple of years. And there was one comment that you made about meal kits, and I was thinking that the number of meal kits that are available now in supermarkets, but also through delivery. And that's actually one of the lesson plans that we've got in our Year 9 scheme of work, is around developing a meal kit. So I think that that's something that would be quite useful for pupils to do, so that they can actually develop a meal kit that would perhaps be a bit, which would cover a different cuisine to one that they're actually used to.
That sounds an amazing idea. Yeah, it's great to think about it, and yeah, just, you know, chopping up and adding elements to what you think will be worthwhile and workable in the kitchen too.
Great. And then one final question, unless Ewan's picked up any others, but just thinking about encouraging children and young people to try new foods. So we've talked quite a lot about fruit and vegetables and getting them to try new fruit and vegetables, but there are so many other fantastic foods to try. Have you got any tips to help with getting them to try new foods?
I guess exposure is always key, so don't give up. That's how I do with my two. But then sometimes you spend so much effort when it comes to preparing a meal, with your students as well, and then the reaction might not be enthusiastic. I know how it feels. So when it comes to it, I guess appreciate. Even for adults, we might not want to try something new every time. So it might just not be their moment. But I think with time, with the right moment, it will come. It's just, it will take some time. And of course, there's evidence showing that early introduction of flavors is always useful. So don't be, I guess, too nervous about introducing flavors and textures from early on. Be brave with it. Be adventurous in the kitchen, try different things. Of course, be mindful of any possible allergies, but I think just introducing different things at an early age is always a good thing. Yeah, so a lot of that experience as well comes from the food shop. So this is why, when it comes to, for example, shopping for fish, I think the fishmonger is always a good way to start to talk about, fish and, where food comes from, and it all ends up in the table. It doesn't just come out of a box, for example.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. And I think as well, actually, is actually understanding how different foods should be cooked. So the example that you gave about the bitter gourd and knowing that you need to take the seeds out. And I remember buying a very small gourd and cooking it, and actually it was revolting. But it was me, I hadn't cooked it properly. So it was then, I think, yes, it's very much a way of sort of knowing how to cook something in order to get the best from it and making sure that you get the best flavour. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's so many different, when it comes to fruit and veg, particularly vegetables, available around the world. And it's, knowing how to properly cook it. And I think the seeds is always there. They're always there to get you. So
yes, yes, definitely.
Give it another go.
yes, maybe I will. Yeah. Right, okay, well, that's all the questions I had written down. Ewan, were there any others?
So I think we've kind of covered all the questions. So thank you everybody for putting questions in the chat and engaging. Just had a few kind of more general comments. A lot of teachers showing support for different recipes, African, Polish recipes, and things like that. And I was mentioning that we'd done a piece of research, Francis, into teacher and pupil kind of attitudes and things they wanted to see, and actually for both the teachers and the pupils, it was quite a common theme to say we would like more more culturally and ethnically diverse recipes. So there's definitely a demand there. And thank you everyone for sharing some tips for that in the chat as well. Some great examples, a paratha recipe and some broths that are Polish and German. So thanks everyone for engaging and giving your ideas.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, so we're just coming to the end now. Before we say goodbye, I just wanted to say thank you. So thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, Georgine, for your input and recording your presentation for us and actually joining us tonight. So it is 5:25 here. What's the time with you in Hong Kong?
It's about 1 a.m.
Oh. So thank you.
It's all great. It's lovely to meet you all, and it's great to connect with you again, Frances, and see you. And to if you've got any further questions or comments, do pop me an email, or we can connect on social media. I think again, the world is closer than we think, so it's great, and we can all share through the love of food too. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Georgine. Thank you, and thank you very much, Ewan, as well.